Hey folks, we are now on our fifth concealed carry FAQ, things I wish I knew, general knowledge type of things for your firearms, specifically and noticeably on your handguns. So, a lot of nomenclature surrounds handguns and concealed carry and guns in general. So let's talk about some of them. So today we're going to be going over just general trigger types. So this is a 6-hour P320, 9mm. We are unloaded. We are safe. Good. So with this weapon, every trigger pull is exactly the same. So let's demonstrate. The trigger pull is always going to have the same amount of pressure needed to squeeze the trigger, and the reset is always going to be the same, okay? The reset on a trigger is how far the trigger needs to move forward before the action on the trigger has been engaged for you to fire your next round, okay? So let's take a look at a different type of pistol. This is referred to as striker fired. The reason it's referred to as striker fired is because there's no hammer. So when they're talking about a striker fired trigger, this is the type of setup that they're referring to. There is no safety, there is no decocking lever, and the trigger pull is consistent every single time. Now, this firearm is different. There are a couple differences here. One, we've got a hammer. Two, we've got a safety. The safety lever also has a decocker. What's a decocker? Well, this is your hammer down. That's a decocker, okay? It decocks the hammer. So, this is a double action, single action trigger with a safety and a decocker. Well, how does that work? Well, simple. So, you load your firearm, bammo. And now, this firearm in this configuration is generally speaking not safe to carry right now in your holster. The reason is, it is in single action mode. The trigger, or rather the safety is not engaged and the hammer is back, all right? So you have two choices. You can put on the safety, and then now the gun will not fire no matter what you do, or you can disengage the safety and you can decock it. If you have a weapon like this, you don't need to do both. You can if you want, you do not need to do both. You can put the safety on, and so now it will not fire, or you can leave the safety off, but make sure it has been decocked. So, how does that work? Well, this is the double action trigger pull. Let's zoom in here, and hopefully you guys can see. I realize the angle is bad. You know what we're gonna do? We're just gonna stand up and move closer to the camera, and we're gonna turn to the side, and hopefully that will make this easier for everyone. So, here we are. This is the double action trigger pull. Do you see how far back I had to pull? See how long the creep is on the reset? There's the reset. So, in double action mode, you have to exert more pressure, this is generally measured in pounds, in order for the trigger to fire. Bam, just like that. Well, what's the difference? Well, let's put it into single action mode. Safety on, will not fire. Safety off. Watch the difference. And then on the reset. See how close it is. I did not have to go forward very far. Just a tiny little bit of slack, and then it engages again. So, that is the difference between those two types of triggers. Now, what is best is open to debate. There are some people who would never, ever, ever carry a firearm with just a regular safety on it. And an example of that is a 1911, okay? A 1911 fires in single action mode all the time, basically. There are ways that you can make it different, but it's really unsafe to handle your 1911 that way. So just assume that's not the case. Your 1911 fires in single action mode all the time. And so with your 1911, you carry it cocked and locked, which is around in the chamber, hammer back, and safety on. This is cocked and locked, also known as position 1 for a 1911. That is the way a 1911 is designed to be carried. And so now you need to make sure you sweep the trigger somehow. I'm using my thumb before you can fire. So that's part of your draw. You bring out, you disengage the trigger, and you present your firearm. There are some people who are dead set 100% against the firearm that functions in just that regard. That there's no decocker, there's just a safety. While I have a personal preference that I do not want to carry a gun like that with a safety on, I realize that there are some circumstances, especially if you're an open carrier and you really like to carry your 1911, then that's what you're stuck with. If you're a concealed carrier and you really like to carry your 1911, again, that's what you're stuck with. That's just the way that gun functions. I prefer a compromise between the two on my firearms, and this is what it is. You get a firearm with a decocker, and there are lots of firearms. Beretta does a decocker, H&K does a decocker. This is an FNX 45, again, you've got a decocker, and I think it works great. The only drawback, as it were, is that first shot. And we'll go over this again. You have to squeeze the trigger. You have to put much more pressure. Usually about 2/3 as much pressure on this trigger in order to get it to fire. Now, is that going to be a problem when you're in a life or death situation? All you have to do is pull out, present your gun, and fire. It's not hard. It's only that you really notice it when you're focusing on it, if that makes sense. Now, in this trigger, there's no slack. Boom, the pressure's right there, and as you can see, the hammer starts to go back as soon as I pull the trigger. As soon as I start pulling on it, the hammer's going back. Now, single action on this gun, it's basically the same thing. There's a bit more slack though. Boom, slack, then there's the wall, and then it breaks. With the SIG, slack. See all this? This is slack, engaged. So, those are the 2/3 general types of safeties and triggers that you will find on firearms. There are some, typically speaking, just revolvers that are double action only, where you've got that super long trigger pull right there for every single shot. It's very hard to be accurate with such a shot, and it is very hard to be consistent and keep your rounds all in the same place on your target. I am really enjoying the double action, single action. I'm really enjoying the decocker. I really like that. When my new setup is ready to go, we'll talk about that, and I'll show that to you guys, and hopefully you can understand why I made the choices I made. Let's talk about caliber. Caliber wars. It is important to remember that ballistic gelatin is just a simulation, it's just a test. Ballistic gelatin simulates muscle tissue, and that's it. The human body is not made of just muscle tissue. You've got skin, you've got bones, you've got fat, you've got blood vessels, arteries, blood itself, and organs, all of which have a different consistency and respond differently to being shot. In my opinion, anything less than a 9mm is just really not something you should be carrying. And a .38 Special is about equivalent. So 38 Special and up is an acceptable self-defense caliber. A .380, if that's all you've got, okay, great. But you can get the same size gun in a 9mm, and why wouldn't you just do that? 22 is definitely not an acceptable defense round. Just don't even do that. The most common is 9mm, 40 Smith & Wesson, and 45. And there are people who are stuck on one particular round. Me personally, I happen to like the 45. It's what I'm carrying right now. I'm carrying a Springfield XDM in 45. And the reason for that for me is I just don't see how a bigger hole is worse. All other things being equal, same penetration, so on and so forth, how is a bigger hole worse? Obviously the downside of 45 is you've got about half the rounds in a similar sized gun. This FNX is an exception. When you get into full-size handguns like this FNX has a 15 round magazine. On the other hand, you could get a 20 round magazine for a Glock and it's about the same size. So you're still missing out. If you are talking about pocket pistols or concealed carry compact pistols, this is in 9mm. This is 15 rounds. This is comparable in size to the gun I'm carrying right now, and I've got 9 rounds in it. Nearly half, same size handgun, but you miss out on the round count. So, hopefully that was informative. Hopefully it gave you some information and some food for thought. If you have any questions or comments, please ask them below. And as always, please like and subscribe. Thank you.